everyone. I was going to ask if you can hear me at the back, but I'm guessing you can hear me at the back. Thanks so much for coming out for this event, which is called Shaping Scotland's Stories from Inspiration to Publication. My name is Alastair Braidwood, and I'll introduce the other members of the panel in a moment. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit more about this year's festival. It's the third year of the Paisley Book Festival, which has been developed as part of Future Paisley, a radical and wide-ranging programme of events, activity and investment using the town's unique and internationally significant cultural story to transform its future. And I think you can see that as you wander around Paisley itself. Since 2022 is the year of Scotland's stories, the theme of this year's festival is Stories Mak Us. And we ask authors and audiences to reflect on the transformational power of stories in their lives. And that's basically at the heart of this event. So first of all, let me introduce the people on stage. Author and poet Anne Pia, whose work includes Transitory and Language of My Choosing, but we're going to hear another reading in a moment from another book. And beside me is freelance editor of Lewis Press, who has worked closely with Anne, Jennie Renton. Here we have author Mick Kitson, whose debut novel Sal won the Saltire First Book Award and whose latest novel Featherweight has just been published by Canongate. And finally, Mick's editor at Canongate commissioning editor, Joe Dingley, who is moving to Sceptre, I just found out before we got on stage. Hello, Joe. Welcome to you all. We're going to discuss the ins and outs of publishing and becoming a writer and all sorts of other things. But first of all, Anne, could you give us a reading, please?
Sure. Is that switched on? Switched on, is it? Yeah? Okay, good. Hello, everyone. I'm going to read from my new book. It's published in 2020, November 2020, and it's a series of essays. It's called Keeping Away the Spiders. The spiders, of course, are horrible things. As I lie in bed alone, I consider the spider that may be lurking underneath the bed frame. I see a large black shape, fast moving, as loose in her movements as a dusting cloth. This spider has some power over me. She hears my breath. Our movements coordinate. With each shift of my position, she's alerted. In dodging my gaze, she renders me completely paralyzed. She's skilled in subterfuge with a wide range of vision as she scans her surroundings, and hydrostatic impetus in her every move, at once still and then quickly out of nowhere and then away. I do not know who I am. Who are you, I often ask myself as I take in the streets of my city, the sound of church bells, watch the windows of my flat, or ride a bus to the gym. Am I happy or a pathological depressive? Passionate, generous of heart, or mean with my money? Arrogant and self-promoting, or self-doubting and choked with anxiety? The reality is that I am and have been all of these conflicting things, and much, much more. A contradiction, as variable and complex as the chemistry of spice in a curry. And how much of what others say of us can we trust, should we take seriously? The determining factor, what defines or frames us, is mainly external. The circumstances that are imposed on us or the situations that we choose. Who we are is often reactive and improvised within a given environment. We are unreliable. We continually construct and deconstruct, reconstruct and mutate. In the absence of our interaction or engagement with a set of circumstances, when all human contact is swept away, who are we then, and what remains? Spiders are capable of creating great beauty. Their artistry and craft are astonishing. Their senses always on high alert, reacting to every movement, sound, and change of air. In every place that they inhabit, they are immensely productive. From their natural resources, their genetic code and heritage, they create copious yarn of the finest silk and endless streaming, light-filled gossamer. As individuals, we have that same innate ability to create around us that same magic, that capability for what is supernatural, beyond the bounds of human capacity, that can make our lives not only valuable or meaningful, but an existence never before imagined. We are capable of great and small acts of importance, significance, grace, and beauty.
Thank you very much, Anne. First question I want to ask is, every writer I've spoken to seems to have their own unique story about how they came to be a published writer. Can you give us a brief explanation of yours?
Well, I'd written a lot professionally in my work, but when I retired, I had a kind of crisis, a relationship crisis, just after I'd retired in my early 60s, and met someone who was writing poetry. She'd lost a partner, and she was writing poetry. And so she basically asked to see some of the stuff that I'd been kind of plittering away with. Anyway, that all happened, and then a friend of mine said, she'd read my poetry, and said in 2015, why don't you think about writing a book? And I thought, I'll never write a book. I don't have the commitment for this and all the rest of it. But slowly, I just started putting pen to paper, as it were, and had the book done by 2016. And then Lewis, within hours, took it on. So I was very, very lucky. And that it completely transformed my life, and it was unexpected and unplanned, like the spider.
Like the spider itself. So, Jennie, once a writer like Anne is signed by a publisher that you are working with, where do you come in? What's your role initially?
Well, initially, I've got to read the book and work out, well, what I'm doing initially is I'm trying to develop an ear for the author's voice. And the stronger sense of that I have, the more able I am to notice things that are possibly needing to be cut, or if there's a difference in structure. But attuning myself to the spirit and style of the author is what I first do. And then personally, I like to meet the author rather than deal with them at a distance. And I've been fortunate to do that with almost all of the authors I've dealt with.
And how did you find this relationship at first? Because I think for any first-time published author, it's a new thing. Well, of course, you're any creative act, you're very sensitive about, I suppose. I was full of my own dignity, I suppose, when I met Jennie, and very, very defensive. And, you know, I've written professionally and blah, blah, you know, all that stuff. And Jennie was very skilled, actually, in kind of just calming me down and building trust in me. And I began to see eventually that I could trust her judgment and that she had a very important role to play. And, you know, she changed my book, really. Is every writer you edit different? Are they all different each time? Very different. I mean, in the case of Anne, actually, Anne, I was just trying to remember how I first ever saw it. Was Picture Review. Anne was in I think a kind of deep dispute with the publisher about what the cover of the book was. I saw that before. That's right. I saw the text. Is that not right? That's right. It's right. Yeah. And so I kind of, in a sense, leapt to her defence in that context and immediately liked her
And I also liked her writing. She's got a beautiful writing style which involves this, I felt, operatic sweeps, and it's like her personality. And she's devoted to learning and dialogue. All of this was great, and I just liked her. I thought she was funny, but sometimes I can't stand the author. But it's just like, but you know, so it's a bit like, you know, I wish it was as well paid as being an advocate, but they have got that thing of, or, you know, you just take whatever criminal you get, and that's how I feel about authors, really.
Well, I'm glad we picked the right one for you to be on this panel tonight.
I'm glad too.
So, do you become almost like, well, if you get on with them, do you become partners then? There's a real partnership that has to build up.
I think the key thing is that an author, I always think of it like this. The author is the magus of the book. They've made this book. And if you talk to authors, they will, you can ask them what's happening here. Say in a work of fiction, they might describe a whole heap of things that aren't even in the book because they've visualized it so strongly. In the case of this particular book, you know, it's not a work of fiction, it's a selective work of, they're both selective works of autobiography, I suppose. What you have to do is you have to re-galvanize the author to hear her own book or his own book anew. And the thing I ask is literally that they do that they either read it aloud to themselves or they get someone trusted who has got a reasonable critical mind and both read it out. And that means that you suddenly hear things very differently. And so it's really not so much, I want to actually galvanize the author's own creative powers. By the time they've put it into the publisher, really they're artists, they're moved on, they're on another book, they're on another project, and you want them really to suddenly re-engage with their own work and say, no, it's not finished. And then when you see someone like Anne doing that, I mean, actually, I have to say for me, it's sort of thrilling, actually thrilling. And I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, you know, I can copy edit and I can dot I's and cross T's, but actually not as well as all that. I mean, it's okay. But I guess that the thing is to really get the person moving with their own work.
That's really interesting. And how did you find that?
Well, that's the hardest part, really, because as Jenny said, you hand the book in and you think, well, that's it, done. And you might have a few commas to put in or whatever, you know. But then what you start to do is to almost rewrite bits of it or add bits in. You know, Jenny would say that's repetitive, or so you've done that before, or represent that in a different way, or tell me more. And I found myself often writing more, actually. That was the creative bit that you know, encouraged me to do. So yes, it was, and the book changed, it moved from what some of it was static to something that actually just took off, as you talk about, an alchemy actually took place. Yeah.
I think it's something many people don't realise is the creative aspect of the editorial process.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Thank you both for now. I'd like to turn to Mick and see if you could give us a reading. Mick, that would be fantastic.
Hello. Can you hear me? Great, thanks. I'm a bit of a loss to know what to read, so I think I'm going to read something from the novel I've got out at the moment, Featherweight, and it is a description of one of the characters in it, whose name is Bill Perry, who was known in the 1850s as the Tipton Slasher, and he was the All-England, he was a pugilist, the All-England bare-knuckle boxing champion. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is because the Tipton Slasher was my great-great-great-grandfather. And the other main character in the book is a girl called Annie Perry, and Annie Perry was my great-grandmother. And when Annie was 7, 8 years old, she was offered up at a horse fair. My father's family are all gypsy traveller people from the Midlands of England, and so my great-grandmother Annie was offered up and sold at a fair, and it was a story that my brother and I were told constantly by my grandmother when we were children, but not only about Annie being offered up. It was a kind of warning, really, you know, that if we didn't behave ourselves, it could happen to us. But also about Bill, about the slasher. When I was thinking about writing, I wanted to write a book about boxing, because I like boxing. And I decided to conflate the two stories. So in this book, Annie is offered up at the horse fair, and she's bought by the slasher. So this is a description of Bill Perry. His huge head could have been hewn from rock, with the colour and texture of a layered sandstone outcrop, and whichever mason worked to form that lumped and blasted countenance, he must have been, as the gaffer had remarked on many occasions, either blind or dead drunk. The nose was almost the shape of a shepherd's crook, the bone broken and flattened into a smooth curve that began in the heavy brow above his small blue eyes and ran up and around and down as if hastily moulded from clay. It ended in large flared nostrils that bristled with greying hairs. Behind his thin lips, the teeth were yellow and black and cracked. Some split, so they looked as if they had been sharpened, and his smile, when it came, was said to make ladies scream. He squinted into the sun, then stepped to the boat edge, unbuttoned his drawers and pissed into the water. The gaffer listened to the plunging sound he made and said, "There's been a lad from Heaney, says we to meet him afternoon. I've sent him for the ale." Bill turned, buttoning himself up, and grunted again, then nimbly stepped onto the towpath. His lithe, rhythmic movement seemed to belie the rock-like bulk of his body. And once on the path, he jigged from foot to foot, stretching his scarred arms above his great head and pointing his long, thick fingers towards the sky. His hands were huge and flat, like spade heads, pitted with scars like his arms and grimed the colour of iron. The boy came trotting down the path, holding 2 stone flagons, and he stopped dead when he saw Bill Perry, bare-chested and stretching his monstrous arms toward the sky. The boy's eyes widened into a horrified gawp, as if he had seen something from a nightmare, and the gaffer called, "He ain't pretty, is he?" There you go.
Thank you very much, Mick. So, a similar question as I asked Anne, what's the background to you becoming a published author?
I was an English teacher, and I was teaching English, and I was teaching lots of novels, and I, for quite a few years, thought there was a novel that I kind of wanted to teach, really, and but I didn't really, I had this kind of vague idea that I wanted to write a novel, but I've sometimes compared it to the way I also feel about Norway, meaning that it was a country that I sort of always had an idea that I'd quite like to go to, but it didn't really bother me that much if I didn't. And it was a bit like, I mean, no disrespect to Norway, but it was just, and but then my father died, and when my dad died, I think that it caused, I suppose it caused a great kind of change in the way I looked at things. A bit like Anne was talking about, you know, a relationship ending, and it does, you know, those things make you kind of reevaluate. And I remember, and I was with my dad for the final 3 weeks of his life, and I was with him kind of 24 hours a day, and I remember having this kind of feeling that I really ought to do loads of things that I'd always said I was going to do and hadn't done, really. And so I thought, well, I'd write a novel. And then, by chance, at my dad's wake, we were all at my Uncle Paddy's house, and we were having a wake for the old man. So everybody, my family are all major league drinkers, and so everyone was getting drunk and crying, and that's the other thing they do a lot. My family, they cry, and I met my step cousin, who I'd not seen for 20 odd years, and he was married to a woman who I was introduced to, and I got to know and was chatting away to her, and we bonded over a mutual love of an American author. And it so turned out that she worked for Canongate Books in Edinburgh, and I didn't really know what she did, but we were chatting away for ages. And I hadn't written a book at this point, but not long after that, I wrote the book, and I wrote it fairly quickly. And when I finished it, I didn't really know what to do with it. My wife and the kids had read it, my brother had read it, everyone that I had kind of said what they thought of it. So I contacted my cousin and said, can I send your wife my book? And he said, yes, you can. And I didn't really send it with an idea of it being published. I mean, it was more actually, I just wanted somebody that wasn't, that was kind of objective to tell me if they thought it was any good. And she said, yeah, we like it, and that's how I got published by Canongate. So I was very, very lucky, really. I made a really good kind of contact at this party.
Now, Joe, is that a typical story?
No. And I wasn't the woman, if anyone's wondering. My colleague Jennie was the lady at the wake, and she passed the book to me and said, I think this has really got something. Can you take it through the editorial process? And everybody agreed without question that this was a book we wanted to publish. But no, we don't generally find them at funerals. That's one I've not heard before.
But I mean, to ask the question, is there a typical writer or story? I mean, I'm sure you met a few who write, who drink and cry. That's maybe something that's regular. But is there a typical story is it all down to the manuscript?
Pretty much. I mean, we were discussing before we came on the stage about how you get a manuscript to a publisher. And my experience at Canongate is that we used to receive both agented and unsolicited manuscripts, so unagented manuscripts. And a ballpark figure on a normal year for me is 600 novels just from agents. So the result was that the unsolicited manuscripts I couldn't get through. We received them and I did read them all, but I read them so late that by the time I got to them, the really good ones had already been snapped up elsewhere. So it does all come down to the manuscript, but I would say for a publisher Canongate size, and we're medium-sized independent, most of the deals are done through agents. So Mick came to us unsolicited, but that's quite rare, actually. The smaller independents, I think, definitely deal directly with authors more. But yeah, mostly my dealing is with agents. So it was very unusual and really nice to just meet Mick and find this book.
And we spoke about the editorial process between Jennie and Anne. How did you guys find it, Mick? How, for yourself, first-time author, did you even consider when you put the book in that there would be this editorial process that went with it?
No, not really. But I was... what I felt was when I met Jo and we talked quite a lot, and I just felt immediately that she was... I mean, first of all, I recognised that she was much, much cleverer than me. And she was obviously somebody with a tremendously kind of, I don't know, a good eye and a good way of understanding the way that fiction works. I mean, she was, and so I was really pleased when they said that she was going to edit me. And I think the first thing we did was we changed the name, didn't we?
Yeah, we changed the title.
Yeah. So the first series of discussions we had was talking about renaming it, because I'd named the novel originally. Can you remember what it was called? I can't even. It was 4 nouns, wasn't it? Like it was called something like fire, water, shelter.
Yeah, another word.
Wasn't it? you know. But it was like a 4-noun list thing, which came from the SAS Survival Handbook. You know, it was like the 4 things you needed to survive. So it was that, which wasn't a great title. And so we had quite a lot of talk, didn't we, about...
Yeah.
And then I think Jamie came up with Sal.
Yeah, it definitely
was it
wasn't
you
me.
or Jamie?
It wasn't me. No,
it wasn't me. I think it was Jamie Byng, the sort of swashbuckling head of Canongate Books, came up with Sal, which is great, you know. So yeah.
I remember that we had an argument over the ending as well.
With loads of arguments. We did.
Usually we sort of ended up with a compromise.
Yeah. Yeah, I got very grumpy and bad-tempered and stamped my feet about certain editorial decisions. But I also, I mean, for example, Anne was talking about, you know, rewriting and putting more in. I mean, one of the things that Joe brought to my attention about the original manuscript was that there was a whole area in which it wasn't plausible that the character of Sal would kind of accept her mother and accept what had happened to her, in a sense, at the hands of her mother, in the way that she did in the book. And I actually ended up, I had to write a whole new chapter and expand loads of bits. And actually, that rewrite chapter, which was largely down to discussions that I've had with Joe, that rewrite chapter is now actually my favourite chapter of the book. It's the bit of the book that I really like. So, you know, it shows, doesn't it, that just because you've written it doesn't mean you really know that much about how it's going to come over.
It's really in this editorial process that the book emerges, the final book emerges.
Yeah.
And do you go through different stages of kind of resentment, acceptance, trust? I mean, are there different... It sounds like there will be.
Yeah, I think... You mean with Joe?
I just think... If that's your editor, then that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, no, I mean, what happens is you get the manuscript back and Joe's written things on it and cut bits, you know. So we had lots of arguments about what is and is not cut. And there are, you know, so yeah, you sometimes you resent it a bit, and sometimes I just stamp my feet and point blank refuse to do it. But more often, I think I sort of do. I think you have to trust that the editor knows what they're doing, and you have to let them do what they do.
I would say also, when he says I cut bits of his book, I suggested that he cut bits of his book. I did not delete swathes of manuscript.
No.
That's really important. If an agent, well, anybody really, is telling you that you have to do something to your book, you don't. Like, it should be a suggestion. Should be a conversation. But I strongly suggested that he cut sections of his book.
No, they were suggested cuts. I mean, I do behave I am a bit of a drama queen when it comes to, you know, the way that the book is edited. So I do, you know, but Joe's very sort of stable and kind of intelligent about the way that she looks at it.
So there were no regrets once the book was out there published?
No,
you could see
how... No, none at all, really, no. I mean, we had the disagreement we had about the end of Sal. I was right, because... but
this is a bit like a therapy session now.
The book ends with this really beautiful image of a snowflake falling on water and disappearing, and it's actually a reference to Burns's to Tam O'Shanter, where, you know, the pleasures are like the poppy spread, you touch the bloom, the flower is shed, or like a snowflake on a river, a moment white, then gone forever. It's a kind of nod to that idea of something kind of beautiful just dissolving, and I really wanted to keep it in, I think it was the right decision, really.
And Sal won the Saltire First Book Prize, didn't it?
Yeah.
So did both of you kind of look at each other and went, told you?
Yeah, I was astonished when it, I was. Yeah. But, you know, I think that, I think what Jo is really good, my experience with Jo is what she's really good at is kind of seeing what's kind of creaky in the way that you've plotted it and the way that you've presented the story and the way that you've put the character together. I mean, that's really what her skill is, I think.
And Jo, you were saying how many books that you read, and then is every writer that you then go on to work with, is that different for you, or are there certain editorial practices that you kind of apply each time?
It's different every time in that every person that you work with is going to be different. But like Jennie, I try and meet in person initially. It's not always possible with international authors, but if they're based in the UK, I try and meet up with them and get a real idea of how they feel about the book. And we talk about everything, you know, how do you imagine the cover? Have you already thought about that? Because it's really important to have a clear image of how they're seeing things. And then if you see things differently, you know how to come at suggesting those changes, and you can tailor your advice around what you already know about the author and the way they see the book. I've done as many as 7 rounds of structural edits with authors. So in that sense, some take no editing at all, or barely any. And it is different every time how much work is put into the editing process. I think with Mick it was maybe three rounds, something like that, for each book.
Yeah, about 3.
Which is kind of, average. But no, I mean, each one is completely different. And I edit a mixture of things, you know, novels, short stories, memoir, and each one of those is different in itself. So.
You don't have to answer this, but has there ever been a time where it's just that this isn't working, and I had to kind of say this relationship? Because what you're all saying is that this relationship is key to the final book being a success. Yeah. So has there been any time where you've had to kind of say no?
No, actually. I mean, we've definitely had arguments over certain points. But no, it's never combusted. I've never walked away from a brilliant book because I lost an argument about an ending.
Jennie, yourself?
I've had some cataclysmic failures of relationship. There was one author, and what the publisher told me to do was cut the book by 40,000 words, but not to tell the author. In fact, I've had two of those experiences. Anyway, why would you do that if you're not a masochist? I mean, so I'm out there, and the author thinks it's all me, you see. Anyway, this particular author, who will be nameless, so will the publisher, but it wasn't Canongate or Lewis. God. This guy he idolised his subject. It was a biography. It was a work of fantasy and hagiography in parts. And then it was also actually brilliant. And I began to see the author as a sort of medieval troubadour. He just didn't belong to this century. Anyway, what happened was, and he was, I mean, nothing against being dyslexic, but he was. And it's just everything that you ever wanted for Christmas at once. And anyway, the thing was that I had managed to eliminate, 35,000 words or so, when he sent me an email which said, I have restored everything. That was it. And it was just like really embarrassing, because I think I just learned so much that I never wanted to have the opportunity to apply ever again, you know, with that one. But it was a disaster. And I can see now things I could have done. But I don't know if any of you are interested in editing. I recommend Diana Attle's book, Stet, in which she describes, among many other things, how she lost V.S. Naipaul for the publisher Andre Deutsch. And that was simply because she said to him, I don't think this is really, you know, you've lost your mojo on this one, but hey, and he just next morning wrote to the publisher and said, send me everything, send me all my papers back now. And that was the end of it. And she dreamt about it for the subsequent 10 years, so there you go. It's awful to be an editor sometimes.
Shiver down your spine thinking about that. But it's an interesting point about sometimes you have to edit, perhaps you've word comes from on high, this can go no longer than 80,000 words or something like that. I mean, that has got to be difficult if it's, the initial manuscript is, much bigger than that.
Well, I found that there's hardly a book that I've had editorially that couldn't lose 10%. I mean, 10% is almost like standard. But in terms of pointing things out, I eventually got really fed up with some authors telling me that they're anti. I mean, I know you were involved with relations in all of this, but, they would say, my auntie says it's fine, my cousin says it's fine. I didn't want to hear about them anymore, and so I had heard some horrible American politician going on about one strike and you're out, and I thought, right, mates, that's you. And honestly, now, if I'd ever had the opportunity to go through 7 goes, I have done that with about a few books. Sometimes it takes that, and sometimes I haven't had the opportunity actually to complete that process because the timescales given are so crisp. But, I'll tell the author very clearly, this is needed. And if they say, no, it's not, I'll maybe say, well, I think it is. And then if they say no, it's their book and it's my life. And that's how I ended up feeling, it was awful.
Yes, Anne.
I don't know if it's an age. No. In fact, you kept saying, this, but it's your book, and that was very nice. No, but I did have the experience. I can't remember if it was the first book, if it was Language of My Choosing, or if it was Spiders, actually. But I did have the experience. And as I say, I don't know about age, but the sexual references were pretty explicit. Had been taken out by the editor I had before Jennie. And I complained to Jennie, and Jennie said, oh, for God's sake, put them back in, So I felt there was a sort of, maybe a kind of prudishness about a certain generation of editors. I don't know, but that's how I experienced the editors I had before you came along.
I just want to say very quickly that you mustn't foist your own views on the author.
Yeah.
The author, that's the whole thing about it. You have to really respect their individuality, their integrity, their intention, and their language. And, one of the most interesting sort of other experiences I had was with, editing Poverty Safari, which I had about 10 days to look at. And Darren McGarvey was fabulous. I was terrified of speaking to him in the first place. But, there's another person, strong personality. And then a friend of mine said, I've never seen a worse edited book than that. She's still a friend, but and it was because I was attempting to maintain the spoken word, the sound of Darren's voice on the page, and that meant sort of going round some of the more formal conventions.
That's really interesting. I think maybe coming from a musical background where there is perhaps more collaboration initially, that maybe they're more open to it, perhaps. We're going to talk a bit more later, but I think we could open it up to questions from the audience if anyone has them. I've got plenty, but it would be good to hear from you. I don't know, is there a mic? No? Okay, they're all on stage. So shout it out if you do have one. Yes? I'll just quickly repeat that so people can hear. Just asking about the other aspects of the editorial process, such as cover design, that maybe people aren't so aware of.
I nearly walked away from Lewis, actually, with Language of My Choosing, because the person that had designed the cover, it's about living a life between two cultures, that first book, actually, and the creative space that affords, where you can write your own pathway. But the cover designer had wanted to put Gadget coffee machines and ice cream cones and flags on the front. And I felt that the book was worth a bit more than that, really. So we reached an impasse. And eventually Jennie came along and resolved that. For keeping away the spiders, I had my own cover in mind, and I was absolutely intransigent that was going to be the cover. I had blue in my head, I saw the type, typeface, and that's what happened. But I think the cover's really important. It's the first thing, actually, that draws you to a book is the look of it. So it's an important aspect, and I don't think there's any compromise on that, really.
Mick, when you had to think about covers and things like that, did you have something in mind to begin with, or was it purely?
No, not at all. No, I just left it to Canongate, really. I mean, I had with Sal, with the first book, I had a kind of idea of the sort of feel of the cover, which is I kind of wanted it to look a bit like a 1950s sort of, you know, there's kind of instructional books that were published, you know, like a boy's book of Western stories or a girl's book of, well, I wanted to have a little bit that kind of look to it. And they, didn't somebody spot a poster on the Underground?
Yeah, it was artwork from a album cover,
That's
CD, and we used the same artist for Sal. Should I comment on covers? Yeah, I mean, it's a massively important part of the publishing process. It's the first thing that anybody sees of your book. I guess with both of yours, Mick, we changed the titles. So the way you had seen the cover, if you had, initially would have been altered so much by the fact that the title changed. But it's one of the first things that I like to ask authors when we have our first chat is, have you got something in your head? Because it tells you a lot about the way they're seeing their book, you know, how they see it sitting on the shelf, who the readers are. And if your image of it and their image don't line up, you need to kind of discuss that and find a way through it. It's actually, I think, one of the hardest parts of the process, because the author is completely, at Canongate anyway, they're sort of removed from the process until they see an artwork that we're proposing, and either they're delighted or they're like, oh my God, this is absolutely not what I was thinking. So it can be really difficult, and you have to discuss it. And personally, I think a good publisher should always make changes if the author requires them. But you know, there'll be a good reason why we've picked the cover we've picked, and I think it's our job to explain what those reasons are. And if they're not good enough, then we need to work through it and change it and do what's necessary.
When a book gets sold to other territories, you have even less input over the cover. So and I've had this with quite a few. A couple of my books have come out in France, but I've had when a Russian publisher buys your book, they seem to love these kind of really lurid, graphic covers that look a bit like sort of 1950s. You know, those kind of exploitation teen movies from the 1950s with very sort of, you know, voluptuous women in them. They look like those, and I recently got the cover for Featherweight in Russia, and it's really hilarious because it's got this really kind of because it's about a gypsy girl that becomes a pugilist, becomes a prize fighter. So they on the front they've got two men having a fight, but then the girl has got a kind of very low cut thing on it, and for some reason nobody can explain, is offering the reader a plum like this. And I have a friend who's a Russian friend, and she said to me that loads and loads of popular books in Russia have these kind of very lurid sort of covers, because Russians just even Russian classics, you know, so even kind of, you know, Dostoevsky would have one of these kind of terribly drawn. So, but you've got no, you know, they can do what they like if they buy the book. So.
Yeah, you're right, because actually my book was published in Italian, non scelta la mia lingua, and the rights, the M&M Edizioni bought the rights from Lewis, and the publisher had his own idea, which was, and he loves black and white. So I just got, what he went for was a black and white picture of me as a child, stage 6, actually, with a cowboy hat on.
And I think it's part of the editorial process that a lot of people won't realise is part of that process. Perhaps there'd be design teams or things like that. So are there other aspects of the editorial process that you think people are not aware of? I'll ask you, Jennie, first.
Well, I've been involved in lots of different things. I'm not quite sure. I think in bigger firms, I mean, I've worked for various firms. In big firms, they've got teams, like you say. I've written blurbs, and the way I've written blurbs is disgracefully dishonest, because my blurbs are designed to say what the author thinks the book is and what the publisher wants the book is to be. And when you read a blurb, pay no attention to it ever, because it's almost certain to be nonsense. Well, not always, but you know, I'm exaggerating because that's the way I go. But no, it's better with a book to open it and read a paragraph, you know, and you know, you get that feeling. I remember doing that in the library when I was about 15, and I'd read a paragraph of whoever, you know, George Orwell or someone, and I mean, I would be just sucked into it, and I'd go and get the book, and I'd get out there and get on the bus. Couldn't wait to get into that world of whatever it was. Really, you know, the actual writing is what should be what grabs you by the entrails. And, you know, if it does, then, you know, you've got this journey to go with this book. Yeah.
That's interesting.
I think the font is important as well, actually. And I've had some struggles with Lewis about font and chapter or no chapter. Will it be lowercase or uppercase? Because with Keeping Away the Spiders, I wanted a very informal script. I wanted no capital letters. We kind of compromised in the end. I'm not entirely happy with it, but I had to go with what they went with. I think it's either Times New Roman or Helvetica, is it, or something, and I wanted something completely different, like noteworthy, and I can't remember Arian or something. So I think those are big issues, because again, it's about the modernity, the contemporary aspect of the book. You know, you don't want something that looks as if it's, you know, the era of Charles Dickens. You know, you want it to be. I mean, I feel I write for audiences of 30, 40-year-olds. Something. You know, that is the audience I have in mind when I'm writing. So I don't want my book to look like something that's a university textbook.
Yeah. And yourself, Joe, is there anything in the process, I mean, as commissioning editor, you're also involved in which books get picked up. So that's part of the process that maybe people don't realise. Yeah,
that's the first thing. It's talking to agents and making them aware of the kind of books that you want to see. Massive amounts of reading, obviously, as you'd hope. The typesetting. I can't typeset myself. I think the experience of the editor will vary so much depending on which publisher, what size of publisher you work for, and also the kind of books you work on. I personally don't typeset, but I do instruct the typesetter. So, you know, the typeface, the kind of the margins, like how you want the book to actually look, that comes from the editor at Canongate and is done elsewhere. I've done all kinds of things that you wouldn't really think of. Like, I remember trying to extract some final changes from Alastair Gray for his illustrated autobiography, and I was told in no uncertain terms to not come back to Edinburgh without them. And as I was leaving the building, my manager said, he'll try and take you out for lunch just to put off doing these changes. So go armed with sandwiches. And I went to Pret and got some like egg and cress sandwiches, and he did. He tried to take me out for lunch. I was like, no need. Eat these and sit down. I left with a migraine. I've done all kinds of things. Basically, you have to get the text finished one way or another, and in any way you need to.
By hook or by crook. Yeah. Jennie.
I'll just say one other odd thing that you have to do, but I don't know how you can do it completely, is fact-checking. Because however expert a person is who's writing, particularly obviously in non-fiction, it's actually astonishing how many errors of fact can creep in. So I've moved into typesetting more But I do a wee bit of sort of editorial stuff, and there's a book now, it's standing at 710 pages, royal size, and I noticed when just typesetting it that one author was supposed to have written 4 books in 1977, so I knew it was wrong. So I've actually more or less demanded in a very imperious fashion that the whole thing is fact-checked, but it really has to be, because this is a work of, it's a work of reference. And so literally every name, every title, and every date in that book, which is 710 pages, so how many thousands of, hundreds of thousands of words? But, you know, where do you stop with that sort of thing? In this case, the author is going to get it done. But if it's to be done in-house, there's a limit.
Yeah.
And it's really tricky, actually, I have to say.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes.
It's really interesting hearing you talking about how you relate, when you asked how did you manage to get published. Can you say a wee bit about, you know, for people that don't have that luck, that you meet in person, or just seems to happen, can you say a wee, give us a bit of advice about what we can do to kind of know what we're doing in terms of that?
Yeah, just if I heard you right, it's basically some more advice on.
Yes, advice how you would make the connections. Sometimes it feels as if there's a kind of gatekeeping goes on, and there's ways about that and access to publishing, and certain groups of people it feel difficult if you don't have connections, but by the sound of it yourselves, you thought you particular connections, you just did the work and you were lucky, but you get the right people, but you just don't have friends other than the luck side of it, that you can give us a wee bit of advice about that we can do as writers practically to help ourselves.
So, just some advice about getting published. You've kind of both spoken about a bit of luck getting involved, and also we mentioned backstage about there's the will to publish people, but just how many books that people get sent and to work on is difficult. So what advice would you give about that initially trying to get published? And all 4 of you, I think, could probably answer that, but start with yourself, Anne.
Well, I mean, as I said, I was lucky with Louth Press. I mean, I was writing about being an Italian Scot and happened to know somebody who was encouraging the Italian Scottish community to produce things. And I happened to say to Carlo, I'm writing this book. So when I finished the book, I finished it on Holy Isle, I sent it to him and said, I've finished the book. He said, send me a description. Sent the description, sent it at 11 o'clock. He sent it to Gavin at Louth Press. At 2 o'clock, Gavin wrote back and said, send me more. And at 5 o'clock, he wrote back and said, come and see me next week. That's what happened with Language of My Choosing. With Spiders, well, I mean, in a sense, I had to convince Gavin, but it followed on nicely that would work. I produced this book with another author while I was doing that, though, and this is Vagabond Voices. I have another publisher, Vagabond Voices, and that's, I just wrote to Alan and said, I'm doing some work on, I feel that there's a lack of interest in European writing just now. I feel the emphasis moved away elsewhere. But he publishes a lot of various foreign language stuff. I wrote to him and just said, I'm interested in Charles Baudelaire. I'm writing some poetic responses to Les Fleurs du Mal. Are you interested? And it was an Saturday afternoon. He wrote back and said, keep going. Yes, I am interested. And that was it. So it was a chance, a chance approach, if you like. That's my experience.
Okay. Mick, yourself?
Well, if I was going to be cynical, I'd say the way to get published, I suppose, these days is to be a celebrity. Because it does seem to me that, it does seem that if you've been on the telly for whatever reason, it does seem laughably easy to get fairly awful books published. But I suppose I think it must be difficult if you don't have an in and if you don't have a connection and you can't get a connection in that way. I think probably Joe would be the better person that would know about that.
Okay, Joe.
I think so. as I said, most of the books that I acquire come from agents. So for the bigger publishers, anyone bigger than Canongate certainly, I wouldn't bother writing to them directly. Most of them don't accept unsolicited submissions. Don't waste your paper. They may have the will to publish unsolicited manuscripts, but they probably just don't have the infrastructure or the time to read them. Focus on agents. Get a copy of the Writers and Artists Yearbook. Look at every agent in there and really research them, work out what their taste is. What I did, actually, when I was first looking for jobs in publishing was go and sit in Waterstone's cafe. And I would just go and pull books off the shelf, stack them up high, and I read the acknowledgements of all the books that I loved. And I would look at who their agent was, who the author's agent was. And I kind of got a hot list of the agents whose taste I thought chimed with my own. Really, yeah, you see, I have some good ideas, Mick. Yeah, really tailor your submissions, because agents, they have egos too, and if they receive something that seems really generic, they're just going to spend less time on it. They want to feel like you know what they do, and this is why they should take the time to read your manuscript. Because as much as I have 600 a year, they probably have like 6,000 a year coming into them. So spend the time really tailoring everything that you send out. And I think also the Waterstones tip applies to the kind of book that you've written as well, because understanding how your book fits into the market, which books are sort of similar, how would you describe it in terms of touchstones that agents and editors will understand? If you like this, if you like Bridgerton, then you'll really like my book. You have to understand how your book fits in into the wider kind of cultural context in which it sits, and use those touchstones in your submissions letters so that they know what they're going to read. Because realistically, they're probably going to read the first 10 pages. If they're anything like me, this is how I work. I read 50 pages, and if I think the writing's good and I'm gripped, I'll read the next 50 pages, and I work in 50-page increments, and you need to keep me for each one. And if I get to the end, then I'll take it through a meeting. So you need to get them to read the first maybe 25 pages for agents, I'm guessing. Make those first 25 pages really, really good, and make sure that your cover letter tells them what else is going to happen after those first 25 pages. Be really clear about what your book is. Sorry, that's really rambly, but I hope
No,
it
but
was
that's
useful.
really interesting. I think, and probably really valuable as well, practically. Jennie, do you have any advice?
Well, I think there's some advantages being in Scotland in the sense of the smaller publishers, where it's very personal, very hands-on. And several occur to me. Now, it can be hard to get through to them, but as well as Lewis Press, there is Saraband, and there's Sandstone Press, and indeed Vagabond Voices. I mean, there are more than that. Yeah. Now, these are ones where it's very much run by core of one or two people, and they've got actual identity. And the first thing to do then is to think, assuming you don't always get an agent. I know loads of people who try to get an agent to represent them, but of course agents can't represent everyone, and so they go for the ones that might run, because the agent's job is dependent on having the relationship that you mentioned earlier, which is a relationship of trust with the publisher. If they start punting people who'll be useless, then that's their job finished. So the thing is, everything that was just said about how to present your book is vital, but you can approach these smaller ones, but you must do your homework about what they've published, what they do. Just read everything that you possibly can, about them. And if all fails, then I must say that, it's just changed from the olden days when self-publishing was seen to be terrible. Self-publishing is no longer seen as some sort of vanity. You can do it really quite well. all the tools are available, and if not, they're really quite... I mean, a friend of mine I've just typeset a book for him, and when he was telling me about the book he wanted to publish, I actually said, why don't you be the publisher? And, I mean, this book is not going to sell at all. It's about the moral emblems of Stevenson. It's really not going to sell. But his son is a magician with 1 million followers. So, hello. And I was thinking, get him to write a book. And he's agreed to write a book. You can become your own publisher. Look up Nielsen. Look up the ISBN agency. Really think about it. Think about the opportunity that the internet allows you to have. Think about even, I've just been approached by a new publisher in Orkney. They're just going to, at the moment, they say they're not going to publish runs of books. They're just going to publish single books. And I think that, there are ways that you can go around the traditional model.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but everyone on stage will be available for you to chat to later on. You can buy one of their books in the bookshop outside, and I'm sure they'll be happy to sign it. And if you get any further questions about the editorial process and being an editor, then Joe and Jennie will be free to talk as well. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone at the Paisley Book Festival for putting on this event, and also Publishing Scotland for making it happen. And I also want to thank yourselves for coming out. It's not been the best weather lately, but I hope you've made the right choice to do so today. And I'd like to thank, finally, Joe, Mick, and Jennie for taking part in this event. Round of applause, please.